Question 1. Governance review demonstrates that a firearms dealer in Maine is processing an application for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun. The applicant claims to reside in a state that issues concealed carry permits and states they own a firearm. What is the most appropriate action for the dealer to take to ensure compliance with Maine's regulations? Option A. Assume that all states have reciprocal concealed carry agreements with Maine and proceed with issuing the permit without further verification. Option B. Issue the permit based on the applicant's assertion of residency and firearm ownership, as this indicates they are a responsible gun owner. Option C. Accept any form of identification as proof of residency and permit status, as long as the applicant appears credible. Option D. Verify that the applicant's state of residence has a reciprocity agreement with Maine for concealed carry permits, and confirm the applicant possesses a valid permit from their home state. Correct answer is D. Verify that the applicant's state of residence has a reciprocity agreement with Maine for concealed carry permits, and confirm the applicant possesses a valid permit from their home state. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine firearms dealer because it involves navigating the specific requirements for issuing a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun. The dealer must ensure strict adherence to Maine's laws to avoid legal repercussions and maintain their license. The core challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying the statutory provisions regarding non-resident applicants, particularly concerning reciprocity and the specific documentation required. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying that the applicant's state of residence has a valid reciprocity agreement with Maine for concealed carry permits, and that the applicant possesses a valid permit from their home state. This approach is correct because Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 101, Subchapter 1, Section 2001 outlines the conditions for issuing a permit to a non-resident. Specifically, it requires that the applicant be a resident of a state with which Maine has entered into a reciprocity agreement, and that they hold a valid permit issued by their state of residence. This ensures compliance with the statutory framework and upholds the integrity of the permitting process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves issuing the permit solely based on the applicant's assertion of residency and possession of a firearm, without verifying the existence of a reciprocity agreement or the validity of their home state permit. This fails to meet the statutory requirement of a reciprocity agreement and the need for a valid permit from the applicant's state of residence, potentially leading to the issuance of permits to individuals who do not meet Maine's legal criteria. Another incorrect approach is to accept any form of identification as sufficient proof of residency and permit status, disregarding the specific documentation mandated by Maine law and the reciprocity agreements. This bypasses the established legal requirements for verifying an applicant's eligibility, creating a significant compliance risk. A further incorrect approach is to assume that all states have reciprocal concealed carry agreements with Maine, and therefore issue a permit without confirming the specific status of the applicant's home state. This assumption is dangerous as reciprocity is not universal and requires explicit confirmation, leading to potential violations of Maine statutes. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation must adopt a systematic approach. First, they should consult the most current official list of states with which Maine has reciprocity agreements for concealed carry permits. Second, they must require the applicant to present their valid, unexpired concealed carry permit from their state of residence. Third, they should verify that the applicant's state of residence is indeed on the list of reciprocal states. This methodical verification process ensures compliance with Maine law and protects both the dealer and the public. Question 2. The efficiency study reveals a significant backlog in processing non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun applications in Maine, primarily due to inconsistent applicant verification and incomplete documentation. Considering Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, Subchapter 1A, which approach best addresses this challenge while upholding regulatory compliance and public safety? Option A. Implement a multi-stage review process where initial screening confirms completeness, followed by a detailed verification of residency, criminal history, and training requirements against Maine-specific eligibility criteria. Option B. Assign all applications to a single, experienced reviewer to streamline the process and ensure consistent decision-making. Option C. Reject any application containing even minor clerical errors without offering the applicant a chance to correct them, to maintain strict adherence to form. Option D. Expedite all non-resident applications that appear complete on their face, assuming the applicant's stated residency is accurate, to reduce the backlog. Correct answer is A. Implement a multi-stage review process where initial screening confirms completeness, followed by a detailed verification of residency, criminal history, and training requirements against Maine-specific eligibility criteria. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a recurring challenge in processing non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun applications in Maine, a significant backlog due to incomplete documentation and a lack of standardized verification procedures. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety by potentially delaying the issuance of permits to eligible individuals, and conversely, could allow unqualified individuals to obtain permits if rushed. It requires careful judgment to balance efficiency with thoroughness and adherence to Maine statutory requirements. The best approach involves a systematic, multi-stage review process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and applicant verification. This entails initial screening for completeness, followed by a detailed review against Maine-specific eligibility criteria outlined in Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, Subchapter 1A. This includes verifying residency, checking for disqualifying criminal history, and confirming the applicant has met all training requirements as stipulated by Maine law. This method ensures that every application is processed according to the letter of the law, minimizing the risk of errors and upholding the integrity of the permitting system. An incorrect approach would be to expedite applications solely based on the applicant's stated residency without independent verification. This fails to comply with Maine's requirement for proof of residency and opens the door to fraudulent applications, violating the public safety mandate of the permitting process. Another incorrect approach is to rely on a single reviewer to assess all aspects of an application, regardless of their expertise. Maine law implies a need for diligent review, and a single point of failure can lead to overlooked disqualifying factors, compromising the system's effectiveness and potentially violating the duty to ensure only qualified individuals receive permits. A further incorrect approach is to implement a blanket policy of rejecting any application with minor clerical errors without providing the applicant an opportunity to correct them. While thoroughness is crucial, Maine statutes aim for a fair process, and such a rigid policy could unfairly penalize applicants and hinder the efficient processing of legitimate applications, failing to strike the necessary balance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of Maine-specific statutes and administrative rules governing concealed handgun permits. This framework should include establishing clear internal protocols for application review, defining roles and responsibilities for different stages of the process, and implementing a quality control mechanism to ensure consistent and accurate application processing. Regular training on legal updates and best practices for applicant verification is also essential. Question 3. The control framework reveals that an applicant for a Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun has a prior conviction for a misdemeanor offense that occurred 5 years ago. Considering the specific requirements for permit eligibility in Maine, which of the following actions best represents the appropriate professional response? Option A. Issue the permit without further investigation. Assuming that since the conviction is a misdemeanor and occurred 5 years ago, it is unlikely to be a disqualifying factor under Maine law. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of the applicant's criminal record to determine if the specific misdemeanor offense is listed as a disqualifier under Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 25, Subchapter 1, and if any statutory waiting periods or conditions for eligibility have been met. Option C. Deny the permit application immediately, as any prior criminal conviction, regardless of its nature or age, automatically disqualifies an applicant for a Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun. Option D. Rely on general knowledge of firearm regulations across different states to assess the applicant's eligibility, assuming that a misdemeanor conviction in one state would likely be disqualifying in Maine. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed review of the applicant's criminal record to determine if the specific misdemeanor offense is listed as a disqualifier under Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 25, Subchapter 1, and if any statutory waiting periods or conditions for eligibility have been met. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an applicant for a Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun has a past conviction that may impact their eligibility. The professional challenge lies in accurately interpreting Maine's specific statutes regarding disqualifying convictions for permit issuance, balancing the applicant's rights with public safety, and ensuring adherence to the precise legal standards set forth by the state. Misinterpreting these statutes can lead to either an unlawful denial of a permit or the issuance of a permit to an individual who legally should not possess one, both carrying significant legal and ethical ramifications. The best approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's criminal record against the specific disqualifying offenses enumerated in Maine Revised Statutes, Title 25, Chapter 25, Subchapter 1, specifically focusing on the definitions and timeframes associated with felony convictions and certain misdemeanor offenses that prohibit firearm possession. This approach requires meticulous attention to the statutory language to determine if the applicant's conviction falls within a disqualifying category, considering any applicable waiting periods or expungement provisions under Maine law. This is correct because it directly applies the governing statutes, ensuring a decision is made based on the established legal criteria for permit eligibility in Maine, thereby upholding both the law and the integrity of the permitting process. An incorrect approach would be to make a determination based on a general understanding of firearm laws or the laws of another state. Maine law is specific, and relying on generalized knowledge or out-of-state regulations would fail to comply with the controlling statutes. This constitutes a regulatory failure, as it bypasses the mandated legal framework for permit issuance in Maine. Another incorrect approach would be to deny the permit solely based on the existence of any criminal conviction, without verifying if the specific conviction is listed as a disqualifier under Maine law or if it meets the criteria for disqualification, e.g., felony, specific misdemeanor types, or recent convictions. This is a regulatory failure because it imposes a stricter standard than what is legally required by Maine statutes, potentially infringing on an applicant's rights. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to grant the permit without a comprehensive review of the conviction's nature and its relation to Maine's disqualifying offenses, assuming that any past conviction is automatically disqualifying. This is a regulatory and ethical failure, as it neglects the statutory requirement to assess the specific offense against the defined disqualifiers, potentially compromising public safety by issuing a permit to an ineligible individual. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes statutory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the specific governing statutes, Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 25, Subchapter 1. 2. Carefully analyzing the applicant's record against the precise definitions and conditions outlined in those statutes. 3. Consulting legal counsel or relevant state agencies if ambiguity exists regarding the interpretation of the statutes or the nature of the conviction. 4. Documenting the decision-making process, including the specific statutory provisions relied upon. Question 4. The efficiency study reveals that a Maine resident holding a valid Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun plans to travel to a neighboring state for an extended visit. What is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action to ensure lawful concealed carry in the destination state? Option A. Assume that a valid Maine permit is recognized in all neighboring states due to general interstate courtesy. Option B. Proactively research the specific firearm carry laws and reciprocity agreements of the destination state by consulting its official government resources. Option C. Rely on informal advice from fellow gun owners about which states honor Maine permits. Option D. Focus solely on understanding Maine's regulations for issuing non-resident permits, as this is the permit held. The correct answer is B. Proactively research the specific firearm carry laws and reciprocity agreements of the destination state by consulting its official government resources. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in a neighboring state. The challenge lies in navigating the reciprocity agreements and differing legal requirements between states, specifically concerning the validity of a Maine permit in another jurisdiction. Misunderstanding or misapplying these interstate laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including charges of unlawful carrying of a firearm. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the laws of both the issuing state, Maine, and the state where the permit is intended for use. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively researching and understanding the specific firearm carry laws and reciprocity agreements of the destination state. This means consulting the official statutes or the relevant state agency, e.g., state police, attorney general's office, of the state where the Maine resident intends to carry a concealed handgun. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal requirements of the jurisdiction where the permit will be exercised. Maine's non-resident permit is issued based on Maine law, but its recognition in another state is governed by that other state's laws and its willingness to recognize permits from other jurisdictions. Understanding these specific interstate agreements is paramount for lawful concealed carry. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is assuming that a valid Maine permit automatically grants the right to carry concealed in all other states. This is a flawed assumption because firearm reciprocity is not universal and is subject to the laws of each individual state. Relying on this assumption would violate the laws of the destination state if it does not recognize Maine permits or has additional requirements. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding reciprocity. While these sources might offer some information, they are not authoritative and can be inaccurate or outdated. Legal requirements for carrying firearms are strict, and relying on unofficial advice can lead to unintentional violations of the law, carrying significant penalties. A further incorrect approach is to only check Maine's laws regarding non-resident permits without investigating the laws of the state where the permit will be used. Maine's laws dictate the issuance of the permit, but the recognition and legality of carrying a concealed handgun under that permit in another state are determined by the laws of that other state. This oversight would fail to address the critical requirement of interstate recognition. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the specific states where concealed carry is intended. Second, consult the official government websites or contact the relevant law enforcement agencies of those destination states to ascertain their specific laws regarding concealed carry and their reciprocity policies with Maine. Third, if the destination state does not recognize Maine permits or has specific requirements, explore options such as applying for a non-resident permit in that state, if available, or adhering to any permitless carry provisions if applicable and understood. Documentation of research and understanding of the laws of each relevant jurisdiction is advisable. Question 5. Which approach would be most effective for a Maine resident seeking to obtain a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in New Hampshire, ensuring full legal compliance? Option A. Relying on general knowledge of firearm laws and submitting an application without verifying New Hampshire's specific procedural and eligibility criteria. Option B. Primarily consulting Maine statutes and regulations concerning concealed carry permits to understand the general principles involved. Option C. Assuming that New Hampshire's requirements will be substantially similar to Maine's and submitting an application based on that assumption. Option D. Thoroughly researching and adhering to New Hampshire's specific application requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits, including any unique documentation or training mandates. Correct answer is D. Thoroughly researching and adhering to New Hampshire's specific application requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits, including any unique documentation or training mandates. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in a neighboring state. The core difficulty lies in navigating potentially differing legal requirements and ensuring full compliance with the laws of the state where the permit is sought, while also understanding the implications for their existing Maine permit. Misinterpreting or overlooking specific requirements of the non-resident state can lead to legal complications, including denial of the permit, or even criminal charges if carrying concealed without proper authorization. Careful judgment is required to identify the most direct and legally sound path to obtaining the necessary permit. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying and adhering to the specific application requirements for a non-resident permit in the target state. This means thoroughly researching the laws and regulations of that state, understanding their eligibility criteria, required documentation, training prerequisites, and any specific application procedures for out-of-state applicants. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal framework governing concealed carry permits in the jurisdiction where the permit is being sought. Maine law permits its residents to apply for permits in other states, but the issuance and validity of those permits are solely determined by the laws of the issuing state. Focusing on the target state's requirements ensures compliance and avoids potential legal pitfalls. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a Maine permit automatically grants reciprocal rights, or that the application process will be identical to Maine's. This is a regulatory failure because each state has its own distinct laws and regulations regarding firearm permits, and reciprocity is not guaranteed or uniform. Relying on assumptions about similarity can lead to incomplete applications or failure to meet specific state mandates. Another incorrect approach is to only consult Maine's firearm laws and regulations when preparing the application for the other state. This is an ethical and regulatory failure because Maine's laws govern carrying a concealed handgun within Maine, not the requirements for obtaining a permit from another sovereign state. The application must satisfy the laws of the state where the permit is being applied for. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application based on general knowledge of concealed carry laws without verifying the specific requirements of the non-resident state. This is a professional failing because it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the precise legal obligations. It increases the likelihood of errors, omissions, and ultimately denial of the permit, potentially leading to legal consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should employ a systematic approach. First, identify the specific jurisdiction whose laws are relevant to the permit application. Second, conduct thorough research into that jurisdiction's statutes, administrative rules, and any relevant case law pertaining to non-resident concealed carry permits. Third, meticulously gather all required documentation and fulfill all prerequisites as outlined by that jurisdiction. Finally, submit a complete and accurate application, understanding that compliance with the laws of the issuing state is paramount. Question 6. Investigation of a non-resident's application for a Maine permit to carry a concealed handgun reveals that the applicant holds a valid permit from their state of residence, which is a state that does not have reciprocity with Maine. The applicant has provided all standard documentation required for a Maine non-resident permit application. What is the most appropriate course of action for the permitting authority in Maine? Option A. Proceed with a thorough review of the applicant's home state permit and all other submitted documentation to determine eligibility based on Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 301, specifically addressing non-resident permit requirements. Option B. Request additional documentation from the applicant that is not explicitly required by Maine statutes for non-resident permits in an effort to further vet their suitability. Option C. Deny the application outright because the applicant's home state does not have reciprocity with Maine, implying automatic disqualification. Option D. Issue the permit based solely on the fact that the applicant possesses a valid permit from their state of residence, assuming this demonstrates sufficient qualification. The correct answer is A. Proceed with a thorough review of the applicant's home state permit and all other submitted documentation to determine eligibility based on Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 301, specifically addressing non-resident permit requirements. Explanation. Investigation of a non-resident's application for a Maine permit to carry a concealed handgun presents a professional challenge due to the need to meticulously verify compliance with Maine's specific statutory requirements for non-residents, which differ from those for residents. The challenge lies in ensuring that all documentation accurately reflects the applicant's home state's licensing status, and that the applicant meets Maine's criteria for non-resident permits, such as demonstrating a genuine need or specific circumstances as defined by Maine law, without overstepping the bounds of the permitting authority's investigative powers. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the submitted application and supporting documentation to confirm the applicant's eligibility under Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 301, specifically focusing on sections pertaining to non-resident permits. This includes verifying that the applicant possesses a valid permit to carry a concealed handgun issued by their state of residence, if such a permit is required by that state, and that the applicant meets Maine's age and character requirements. The process must adhere strictly to the statutory grounds for issuing or denying a permit, ensuring that the decision is based solely on the information provided and the legal criteria established by Maine law, thereby upholding due process and the integrity of the permitting system. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a permit from the applicant's home state automatically qualifies them for a Maine permit, without independently verifying that the home state's permit is current and valid, and that the applicant meets all Maine-specific criteria for non-residents. Another incorrect approach is to deny the permit based on assumptions or information not directly related to the statutory requirements for a concealed handgun permit in Maine, such as personal opinions about the applicant's character that are not supported by disqualifying factors outlined in the law. Furthermore, attempting to impose additional requirements not stipulated in Maine statutes for non-resident permits, or failing to conduct a diligent review of the provided documentation, constitutes a failure to adhere to the established legal framework. Professionals in this role should employ a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes adherence to statutory mandates. This involves a detailed checklist of all required documentation and eligibility criteria for non-resident permits in Maine. Any ambiguities or discrepancies should be addressed by requesting clarification or additional documentation from the applicant, strictly within the scope of the law. The final decision must be grounded in a clear, documented assessment of whether the applicant meets all legal requirements, ensuring fairness and consistency in the application of Maine's concealed handgun permit laws. Question 7. Assessment of a Maine resident's application for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in New Hampshire presents a scenario where the applicant was previously arrested in Maine for disorderly conduct, but the charges were subsequently dismissed. Considering New Hampshire's regulatory framework for concealed carry permits, which approach best ensures a compliant and successful application? Option A. Assume that because the arrest occurred in Maine and was dismissed, it does not need to be disclosed on a New Hampshire application, as New Hampshire law would not apply to an event in another state. Option B. Thoroughly research New Hampshire's specific application requirements for non-resident permits, accurately and completely disclose the prior arrest in Maine, including its dismissal, as requested on the New Hampshire application form. Option C. Rely solely on general knowledge of Maine's concealed carry laws and assume New Hampshire's requirements will be similar, without consulting New Hampshire's specific application form. Option D. Provide a truthful answer by only disclosing convictions and omitting the arrest for disorderly conduct, assuming a dismissed charge is not relevant to a New Hampshire permit. The correct answer is B. Thoroughly research New Hampshire's specific application requirements for non-resident permits, accurately and completely disclose the prior arrest in Maine, including its dismissal, as requested on the New Hampshire application form. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in New Hampshire. The challenge lies in navigating the differing legal requirements and application processes between the two states, particularly concerning the disclosure of past legal issues. A failure to accurately and completely disclose information can lead to denial of the permit, potential legal repercussions, and damage to the applicant's credibility. Careful judgment is required to ensure all information provided is truthful and compliant with both state statutes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves thoroughly researching New Hampshire's specific requirements for non-resident concealed carry permits, including their application form and any accompanying documentation. This includes meticulously reviewing the questions on the New Hampshire application regarding criminal history and any other disqualifying factors. The applicant must then provide truthful and complete answers based on their understanding of Maine law and their personal history. This approach is correct because New Hampshire law, as outlined in RSA 159(6), requires applicants to provide truthful information on their application. Failure to disclose a prior arrest, even if it did not result in a conviction, could be considered a misrepresentation on the application, leading to denial. The principle of full disclosure is paramount in permit applications to ensure public safety and the integrity of the permitting process. Incorrect approach is analysis. Providing a selectively truthful answer by only disclosing convictions and omitting the arrest for disorderly conduct, even if it was dismissed, is an ethically and legally flawed approach. New Hampshire's application likely requires disclosure of all arrests, regardless of disposition, as per RSA 159(6). Omitting this information constitutes a misrepresentation and a failure to comply with the explicit requirements of the application, potentially leading to permit denial and future issues. Assuming that because the arrest occurred in Maine and was dismissed, it does not need to be disclosed on a New Hampshire application is a critical error. Each state has its own criteria for permit issuance and its own application form with specific disclosure requirements. The jurisdiction of the arrest does not negate the requirement to disclose it on an application for a permit in another state if that state's application asks for such information. This approach violates the principle of adhering to the specific regulations of the jurisdiction where the permit is being sought. Failing to consult New Hampshire's specific application form and instead relying solely on general knowledge of Maine's concealed carry laws is also an unacceptable approach. While understanding Maine's laws is important for the applicant's home state, it does not substitute for understanding and complying with the distinct requirements of New Hampshire. Each state's permitting process is governed by its own statutes and administrative rules, and a generic understanding is insufficient for accurate application. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach when assisting clients with permit applications across state lines. This involves 1. Identifying the target jurisdiction, New Hampshire, and its specific governing statutes and administrative rules related to concealed carry permits. 2. Obtaining and meticulously reviewing the official application form for that jurisdiction, paying close attention to all disclosure requirements, especially those pertaining to criminal history, arrests, and any other potentially disqualifying factors. 3. Advising the applicant to be completely truthful and comprehensive in their disclosures, even for events that did not result in a conviction, if the application requests such information. 4. Encouraging the applicant to seek clarification from the issuing authority in New Hampshire if any question on the application is unclear. This methodical process ensures compliance with all applicable laws and ethical obligations. Question 8. The efficiency study reveals that a significant number of applications for Maine non-resident permits to carry a concealed handgun are being processed. Considering the specific statutory framework for Maine, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant method for evaluating an applicant who resides in New Hampshire and holds a valid New Hampshire pistol license? Option A. Thoroughly review the applicant's New Hampshire pistol license and application against Maine's statutory requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits, specifically verifying any provisions related to reciprocity or equivalency of licensing standards between Maine and New Hampshire. Option B. Request that the applicant complete a Maine-specific firearm safety course, even though they possess a valid pistol license from their home state and Maine law does not explicitly mandate this for non-resident permittees. Option C. Automatically deny the application because the applicant is not a resident of Maine, regardless of their home state's licensing status. Option D. Issue the Maine non-resident permit immediately upon confirmation of the applicant's identity and age, without verifying the validity or requirements of their New Hampshire pistol license. Correct answer is A. Thoroughly review the applicant's New Hampshire pistol license and application against Maine's statutory requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits, specifically verifying any provisions related to reciprocity or equivalency of licensing standards between Maine and New Hampshire. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves navigating the specific requirements for a Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun, which necessitates a thorough understanding of Maine's statutory framework and the applicant's compliance with those provisions. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the applicant's eligibility based on their out-of-state status and ensuring all necessary documentation and legal prerequisites are met without overstepping the bounds of the permitting authority's role. Misinterpreting or misapplying the law could lead to improper denial or issuance of a permit, with significant legal and safety ramifications. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous review of the applicant's submitted documentation against the specific requirements outlined in Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, Subchapter 1, specifically sections pertaining to non-resident permits. This includes verifying the applicant's residency in a state that has a reciprocal agreement with Maine or a state whose permit requirements are deemed equivalent by Maine law, confirming the applicant meets the age and character qualifications, and ensuring the application is complete and accurate. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the statutory mandate for issuing permits, ensuring that only qualified individuals receive them, thereby upholding public safety and respecting the applicant's rights under Maine law. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the application solely based on the applicant not being a resident of Maine, without first examining Maine's specific provisions for non-resident permits. This fails to acknowledge that Maine law explicitly allows for non-resident permits under certain conditions, such as reciprocity or equivalency of permit requirements in the applicant's home state. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of the applicable statutes and constitutes an arbitrary denial of a potentially eligible applicant's rights. Another incorrect approach would be to issue the permit without verifying the applicant's home state's permit requirements or the existence of a reciprocity agreement. This bypasses a crucial statutory safeguard designed to ensure that individuals seeking a Maine permit are also deemed suitable to carry a concealed handgun in their home jurisdiction. This oversight could lead to issuing permits to individuals who would not qualify in their own state, potentially compromising public safety and violating the spirit and letter of Maine's concealed carry laws. A further incorrect approach would be to request additional documentation or training that is not explicitly mandated by Maine statutes for non-resident permit applicants. While diligence is important, exceeding statutory requirements can create unnecessary barriers for applicants and may be challenged as exceeding the authority granted to the permitting authority. This approach risks creating de facto requirements that are not legally established, leading to potential legal challenges and administrative inefficiencies. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a systematic and legally grounded decision-making process. This begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant Maine statutes governing concealed handgun permits, particularly those addressing non-resident applicants. When presented with an application, the process should involve 1. Identifying the applicant's residency status and home state. 2. Consulting Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, Subchapter 1 to determine the specific requirements for non-residents, including any provisions for reciprocity or equivalency. 3. Verifying that all submitted documentation meets these statutory requirements. 4. Making a decision based solely on whether the applicant meets the established legal criteria, without introducing personal biases or unmandated conditions. This ensures fairness, legal compliance, and effective public safety. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a firearms dealer in Maine is processing a sale for a customer who presents an expired permit from another state, stating they intend to carry the handgun concealed in Maine. What is the most appropriate course of action for the dealer to ensure compliance with Maine's regulations? Option A. Advise the customer that their expired out-of-state permit is still valid for the purpose of purchasing a handgun in Maine and that they can carry it concealed. Option B. Proceed with the sale, assuming the customer's previous out-of-state permit indicates a general suitability for carrying a handgun. Option C. Inform the customer that their expired out-of-state permit does not authorize them to carry a concealed handgun in Maine and advise them to obtain a valid Maine permit or meet other legal requirements for concealed carry in Maine. Option D. Accept the expired out-of-state permit as sufficient proof of eligibility to carry a concealed handgun in Maine, as it demonstrates prior authorization. The correct answer is C. Inform the customer that their expired out-of-state permit does not authorize them to carry a concealed handgun in Maine and advise them to obtain a valid Maine permit or meet other legal requirements for concealed carry in Maine. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearms dealer in Maine to navigate the complexities of state-specific regulations for non-resident concealed handgun permits, particularly when dealing with an applicant whose out-of-state permit has expired. The dealer must balance their legal obligations to comply with Maine law, prevent illegal firearm transfers, and maintain ethical business practices. Failure to do so could result in legal penalties, loss of license, and damage to reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to verify the applicant's current eligibility to carry a concealed handgun in Maine, even if they possess an expired out-of-state permit. This involves understanding that Maine law, under 25 MRS Section 2001A, generally requires a valid permit to carry a concealed handgun within the state, unless specific exceptions apply. while Maine recognizes permits from other states. This recognition is contingent on those permits being valid. Therefore, the dealer must ensure the applicant meets Maine's requirements for carrying a concealed handgun, which includes having a valid permit or being otherwise authorized under Maine law. Since the applicant's out-of-state permit is expired, it does not confer the privilege to carry concealed in Maine. The dealer must inform the applicant that they cannot proceed with the sale under the assumption of a valid permit, and advise them to obtain a valid Maine permit or meet other legal requirements for carrying a concealed handgun in Maine. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the sale based on the expired out-of-state permit is a regulatory failure. Maine law requires a valid permit to carry concealed. An expired permit is no longer valid and does not grant the privilege to carry concealed in Maine. This action would facilitate a potentially illegal act by the applicant. Assuming the applicant is eligible to carry concealed in Maine simply because they previously held an out-of-state permit without verifying its current validity is also a regulatory failure. The privilege to carry concealed is tied to current, valid authorization. The dealer is responsible for ensuring the applicant meets the current legal requirements for carrying a concealed handgun in Maine at the time of the transaction. Advising the applicant that their expired out-of-state permit is sufficient to purchase a handgun in Maine, without further clarification on their eligibility to carry concealed, is misleading and a regulatory failure. While the purchase of a handgun itself is governed by federal and state laws, including background checks, the ability to carry it concealed is a separate privilege that requires a valid permit. The dealer's advice fails to address the applicant's stated intent to carry concealed and the invalidity of their permit for that purpose. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a proactive and compliance-focused approach. First, they must thoroughly understand the specific requirements of Maine law regarding concealed carry permits for both residents and non-residents. Second, when presented with an applicant who claims eligibility based on an out-of-state permit, they must verify the current validity of that permit. If the permit is expired, the professional must inform the applicant that the expired permit does not grant the privilege to carry concealed in Maine. The professional should then advise the applicant on the correct procedures to legally carry a concealed handgun in Maine, which typically involves obtaining a Maine permit. This ensures compliance with all applicable laws and upholds ethical responsibilities to prevent illegal firearm activity. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that the Maine Department of Public Safety's licensing division needs to streamline its fee collection process for non-resident concealed handgun permits. A recent applicant from New Hampshire is applying for a 3-year permit. Based on the Maine Revised Statutes Annotated MRSA, Title 17, Section 2002, what is the correct total fee that should be charged to this applicant? Option A, $1.50. Option B, $1.60. Option C, $1.20. Option D, $1.70. The correct answer is A, $1.50. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the accurate calculation of fees for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in Maine. The challenge lies in correctly interpreting the statutory fee structure, which may involve different rates based on the duration of the permit and potential administrative surcharges. Misinterpreting these fees can lead to undercharging, which impacts revenue and compliance with state fee regulations, or overcharging, which can result in customer dissatisfaction and potential complaints to the licensing authority. Precise adherence to the Maine Revised Statutes is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a direct calculation based on the Maine Revised Statutes Annotated MRSA, Title 17, Section 2002, which outlines the permit fees. This statute specifies a base fee for a permit and may include provisions for renewals or specific durations. The correct approach meticulously applies the statutory fee for a 3-year permit, which is $1.50, as stipulated by MRSA Title 17, Section 2002, 1A. This method ensures full compliance with the state's established fee schedule, preventing any discrepancies and upholding the integrity of the licensing process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves adding an arbitrary administrative fee not explicitly authorized by statute. This violates MRSA Title 17, Section 2002, by imposing a charge that is not legally defined, potentially leading to overcharging and regulatory noncompliance. Another incorrect approach is to calculate the fee based on a prorated annual rate without statutory authorization. MRSA Title 17, Section 2002 specifies a fixed fee for a 3-year permit, and prorating deviates from this established structure, leading to an inaccurate and non-compliant fee. A further incorrect approach is to only charge the base fee for a 1-year permit $20 and ignore the additional cost for the extended 3-year duration. This fails to adhere to the full fee structure outlined in MRSA Title 17, Section 2002, 1A, resulting in undercharging and noncompliance with the state's revenue requirements for a 3-year permit. Professional reasoning. Professionals must prioritize strict adherence to the governing statutes. When dealing with fees, the primary decision-making framework involves consulting the relevant legislation. In this case, MRSA Title 17, Section 2002, to identify the exact fee structure. Any deviation from the statutory amounts or inclusion of unlegislated fees constitutes a professional failure. The process requires careful reading of the statute, identifying the correct fee for the requested permit duration, and applying it without modification or assumption. Question 11. The risk matrix shows an anticipated increase in applications for Maine non-resident permits to carry a concealed handgun from individuals residing in states with varying firearm regulations. Considering Maine's statutory requirements for permit issuance, which of the following approaches best addresses the implementation challenge of ensuring public safety while processing these diverse applications? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive verification of each applicant's eligibility based on Maine's specific legal criteria, including thorough background checks and documentation review, irrespective of their state of residence. Option B. Prioritize applications from states with firearm laws that are perceived to be as strict or stricter than Maine's, assuming a baseline level of applicant suitability. Option C. Rely primarily on the applicant's attestation of eligibility and the permitting process of their home state to streamline the review of non-resident applications. Option D. Implement a more lenient background check process for non-resident applicants from states with less comprehensive firearm regulations to expedite processing. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive verification of each applicant's eligibility based on Maine's specific legal criteria, including thorough background checks and documentation review, irrespective of their state of residence. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential increase in applications for Maine non-resident permits to carry a concealed handgun from individuals residing in states with significantly different firearm regulations and background check processes. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the Maine licensing authority to balance the state's commitment to public safety and responsible firearm ownership with the administrative burden of thoroughly vetting applicants from diverse regulatory environments. Ensuring consistent application of Maine standards, regardless of the applicant's state of residence, is paramount. The best approach involves a rigorous, multifaceted verification process that prioritizes Maine's statutory requirements for permit issuance. This includes meticulously reviewing the applicant's submitted documentation for completeness and accuracy, conducting thorough background checks that align with Maine's legal standards for disqualifying offenses, and verifying the applicant's stated residency and eligibility under Maine law. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 101, which outlines the criteria and procedures for issuing concealed handgun permits, emphasizing public safety and the applicant's fitness to carry a concealed weapon. It ensures that all applicants, regardless of their home state's laws, are evaluated against Maine's specific legal framework. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the applicant's assertion of eligibility or on the permitting process of their state of residence. This is professionally unacceptable because it abdicates Maine's responsibility to enforce its own laws and could lead to the issuance of permits to individuals who would not qualify under Maine's stringent standards. It fails to acknowledge that different states have varying definitions of disqualifying offenses or varying levels of diligence in their background checks, potentially creating a loophole that compromises public safety in Maine. Another incorrect approach would be to expedite the review process for applicants from states with perceived similar or stricter firearm laws. This is professionally unacceptable as it introduces an arbitrary and subjective element into the application review, deviating from the statutory mandate to assess each applicant individually against Maine's specific criteria. It risks overlooking potential disqualifying factors that might be present but not flagged by a less rigorous process in another state. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to deny applications from residents of states with less stringent firearm laws, without a specific, legally justifiable reason based on Maine's disqualifying criteria. This is professionally unacceptable because it punishes applicants based on their state of residence, rather than their individual qualifications or disqualifications under Maine law. The focus must remain on whether the applicant meets Maine's requirements, not on the perceived shortcomings of another state's regulatory system. The professional decision-making process should involve a systematic review of each application against the explicit requirements of Maine Revised Statutes, Title 25, Chapter 101. This includes verifying all submitted information, conducting independent background checks as mandated by Maine law, and making a determination based solely on whether the applicant meets the statutory qualifications and does not possess any disqualifying factors as defined by Maine. Any deviation from this process, such as relying on external assurances or making assumptions based on an applicant's state of origin, introduces unacceptable risk and regulatory noncompliance. Question 12. The efficiency study reveals that a Maine resident who currently holds a valid permit to carry a concealed handgun issued by their home state of New Hampshire wishes to obtain a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in Maine. What is the most prudent course of action to ensure compliance with Maine's regulations? Option A. The applicant must research Maine's specific requirements for issuing non-resident permits to carry a concealed handgun, including any necessary application forms, documentation, background checks, and training, and then submit a complete application accordingly. Option B. The applicant should rely on advice from online forums and acquaintances who have experience applying for permits in Maine to guide their application process. Option C. The applicant should submit their New Hampshire permit along with a brief letter explaining their desire to carry concealed in Maine, expecting it to be processed as a de facto Maine permit. Option D. The applicant can assume their New Hampshire permit is valid for concealed carry in Maine due to reciprocity, and no further action is required. Correct answer is A. The applicant must research Maine's specific requirements for issuing non-resident permits to carry a concealed handgun, including any necessary application forms, documentation, background checks, and training, and then submit a complete application accordingly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in a neighboring state. The challenge lies in navigating the reciprocity agreements and differing legal requirements between states, ensuring compliance with the laws of both the applicant's home state and the state where the permit is sought. Misunderstanding or misapplying these regulations can lead to serious legal consequences, including denial of the permit, criminal charges, or revocation of existing permits. Careful judgment is required to accurately identify the applicable laws and procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly researching the specific concealed carry laws and permit application requirements of the target state, Maine, as well as understanding Maine's own requirements for issuing non-resident permits. This includes identifying if Maine has reciprocity agreements with the state in question and understanding the application process, including any required documentation, background checks, and training. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal framework governing concealed carry permits for non-residents, ensuring adherence to the specific statutes and regulations of both jurisdictions involved. It prioritizes accurate information gathering and compliance with the law. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because the applicant holds a valid permit in their home state, it automatically grants them the right to carry concealed in Maine without further application or adherence to Maine's specific non-resident permit requirements. This fails to recognize that permit issuance is state-specific and reciprocity is not always guaranteed or may have limitations. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding the application process. While these sources may offer some insights, they are not authoritative and may contain outdated or inaccurate information. Legal compliance requires consulting official sources and understanding the precise legal requirements as stipulated by Maine statutes and regulations. A further incorrect approach is to submit an incomplete application or omit required documentation, believing that the application will be processed with missing information. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and understanding of the administrative processes involved in permit applications, which typically require all stipulated information for review and approval. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the specific jurisdiction whose laws are in question, Maine. Second, determine the applicant's status, non-resident seeking a permit. Third, consult the official statutes and regulations of Maine pertaining to non-resident permits to carry a concealed handgun. Fourth, gather all necessary documentation and complete the application accurately and completely. Finally, understand the implications of reciprocity agreements, if any, and ensure all requirements of both the applicant's home state and Maine are met. Question 13. Process analysis reveals a Maine resident who currently holds a valid permit to carry a concealed handgun in Maine is seeking to obtain the necessary authorization to carry a concealed handgun in New Hampshire. What is the most prudent and legally sound approach for this individual to ensure compliance with New Hampshire's regulations for non-resident applicants? Option A. Rely on advice from friends or online forums regarding New Hampshire's non-resident permit process, rather than consulting official state resources. Option B. Submit a New Hampshire permit application using their Maine residency information and permit details, without independently verifying New Hampshire's specific non-resident requirements. Option C. Assume that their valid Maine permit grants them automatic reciprocal rights to carry a concealed handgun in New Hampshire without any additional application or verification. Option D. Thoroughly research and meticulously follow New Hampshire's specific application process and requirements for non-residents seeking a permit to carry a concealed handgun, including any unique documentation or eligibility criteria. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly research and meticulously follow New Hampshire's specific application process and requirements for non-residents seeking a permit to carry a concealed handgun, including any unique documentation or eligibility criteria. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in New Hampshire. The core difficulty lies in navigating the reciprocity and application requirements of a different state, while ensuring full compliance with both Maine's existing permit status and New Hampshire's specific regulations for non-residents. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting information can lead to application denial, potential legal repercussions, and damage to professional credibility. Careful judgment is required to accurately identify and fulfill all necessary steps. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively researching and adhering to New Hampshire's specific requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits. This includes understanding any differences in eligibility criteria, application procedures, required documentation, and any specific training or background check mandates that New Hampshire imposes on out-of-state applicants. This approach is correct because it prioritizes direct compliance with the governing jurisdiction's laws, which is the fundamental principle of obtaining a permit in another state. It demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to lawful conduct, ensuring the applicant meets all legal obligations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid Maine permit automatically grants reciprocal rights to carry concealed in New Hampshire without further application or verification. This fails to acknowledge that reciprocity agreements are state-specific and may have limitations or require formal recognition processes. Relying solely on one's home state permit without confirming New Hampshire's non-resident requirements is a regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach is to submit an application for a New Hampshire permit using information or documentation that is incomplete or inaccurate regarding their Maine residency or permit status. This could be an unintentional oversight or a deliberate attempt to circumvent certain requirements, both of which constitute a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Honesty and completeness are paramount in all permit applications. A third incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice from individuals who may not be fully knowledgeable about New Hampshire's non-resident permit laws, rather than consulting official state resources. This can lead to misinterpretations of the law and the submission of an inadequate or non-compliant application, demonstrating a lack of professional rigor and potentially violating specific legal mandates. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, identify the target jurisdiction, New Hampshire, and the specific permit being sought, non-resident concealed handgun permit. Second, consult the official government websites or agencies responsible for issuing such permits in the target jurisdiction to obtain the most current and accurate information regarding application procedures, eligibility, and required documentation. Third, compare these requirements with one's current status and qualifications, Maine residency and permit. Fourth, meticulously gather all necessary documentation and complete the application truthfully and thoroughly. Finally, submit the application through the designated channels and await official approval, understanding that the process may differ significantly from one's home state. Question 14. The efficiency study reveals that a Maine resident, holding a valid Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun, plans to travel to a neighboring state for an extended visit. What is the most prudent course of action to ensure lawful concealed carry of a handgun in the destination state? Option A. Assume that the Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun is universally recognized for concealed carry in all other states. Option B. Wait until arriving in the destination state to inquire about their concealed carry regulations at a local law enforcement agency. Option C. Rely on informal advice from online forums and personal anecdotes from other travelers regarding concealed carry laws in the destination state. Option D. Proactively research the specific concealed carry laws and reciprocity agreements of the destination state, verifying if the Maine non-resident permit is recognized and understanding any additional requirements or restrictions. The correct answer is D. Proactively research the specific concealed carry laws and reciprocity agreements of the destination state, verifying if the Maine non-resident permit is recognized and understanding any additional requirements or restrictions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident seeking to carry a concealed handgun in a neighboring state. The core difficulty lies in navigating the reciprocity agreements and differing legal requirements between states, specifically concerning the validity of a Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun when traveling. Misunderstanding or misapplying these interstate agreements can lead to serious legal consequences, including arrest and prosecution for unlawful carrying of a firearm. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the laws of both the originating state, Maine, and the destination state. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively researching and understanding the specific concealed carry laws and reciprocity agreements of the destination state before traveling. This includes verifying if Maine's non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun is recognized in that state, and if so, under what conditions. If reciprocity is not established, or if the destination state has additional requirements, e.g., a separate permit, specific training, or restrictions on certain locations, the individual must comply with those requirements or refrain from carrying a concealed handgun in that state. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and safety by ensuring the individual is fully informed and adheres to the laws of the jurisdiction they are entering. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a valid Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun automatically grants the right to carry a concealed handgun in any other state. This assumption ignores the fundamental principle that firearm laws are state-specific and that reciprocity is a matter of agreement between states, not an inherent right. Relying on this assumption can lead to carrying a concealed weapon unlawfully in a state that does not recognize the Maine permit, resulting in severe legal penalties. Another incorrect approach is to only consult general online forums or anecdotal advice from other individuals regarding concealed carry laws in the destination state. While these sources may offer some information, they are not authoritative and can be outdated or inaccurate. Legal requirements for carrying firearms are complex and subject to change, and relying on informal advice rather than official state resources or legal counsel is a significant risk. This can lead to a misunderstanding of specific nuances or exceptions in the destination state's laws. A third incorrect approach is to wait until arriving in the destination state to inquire about their concealed carry laws. This is a reactive and potentially dangerous strategy. By this point, the individual may have already inadvertently violated the law by carrying a concealed handgun without the necessary authorization. Proactive research is essential to avoid such situations and ensure lawful conduct from the moment of arrival. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this type of situation should adopt a proactive and diligent approach. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the specific jurisdictions involved, Maine and the destination state. 2. Recognizing that firearm laws are not uniform across states and that reciprocity is key. 3. Prioritizing official sources of information, such as the Attorney General's office or state police website of the destination state, for accurate and up-to-date concealed carry regulations and reciprocity details. 4. Consulting legal counsel if there is any ambiguity or uncertainty regarding the laws. 5. Making a decision based on confirmed legal requirements, which may include obtaining an additional permit, undergoing specific training, or choosing not to carry a concealed handgun in that jurisdiction if compliance is not feasible or understood. Question 15. What factors determine the eligibility of a non-resident applicant for a permit to carry a concealed handgun in Maine, considering the specific requirements of Maine Revised Statutes Title 17, Chapter 101, Subchapter 1? Option A. A general assessment of the applicant's perceived trustworthiness and the absence of any immediate, obvious red flags in their application. Option B. The applicant's stated need for self-defense and the applicant's home state's general leniency in issuing concealed carry permits. Option C. The applicant's assertion of being a law-abiding citizen and the existence of a concealed carry permit from their state of residence, regardless of reciprocity. Option D. Verification of the applicant's residency in a state with a reciprocal permit agreement with Maine. Confirmation of meeting age and character qualifications, as defined by Maine law, and completeness of the application with all required supporting documentation. The correct answer is D. Verification of the applicant's residency in a state with a reciprocal permit agreement with Maine, confirmation of meeting age and character qualifications as defined by Maine law, and completeness of the application with all required supporting documentation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a thorough understanding of Maine's specific requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits, balancing the applicant's rights with public safety, and adhering strictly to statutory provisions. Misinterpreting or overlooking any detail could lead to an improper denial or approval, with significant legal and ethical repercussions. The best approach involves a meticulous review of the applicant's submitted documentation against the explicit criteria outlined in Maine Revised Statutes Title 17, Chapter 101, Subchapter 1, specifically concerning non-resident permits. This includes verifying residency in a state that offers reciprocal permits to Maine residents, confirming the applicant meets all age and character requirements as defined by Maine law, and ensuring the application is complete and accurate. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the statutory mandate to issue permits to qualified individuals and to deny them to those who do not meet the legal qualifications. It prioritizes adherence to the law, ensuring both the applicant's rights and the public safety are respected within the established legal framework. An approach that relies solely on the applicant's statement of good moral character without independent verification of disqualifying factors, such as criminal history or mental health adjudications, is incorrect. Maine law requires specific checks to ensure an applicant is not prohibited from possessing a handgun. Similarly, an approach that assumes reciprocity based on the applicant's state of residence without confirming Maine has a reciprocal agreement or that the applicant's home state permit meets Maine standards for reciprocity is flawed. This bypasses a critical statutory requirement for non-resident permits. Finally, an approach that prioritizes expediency over thoroughness, potentially overlooking minor discrepancies in the application that could indicate a disqualifying issue, is also incorrect. The law demands diligence in the review process. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant statutes and regulations. This involves identifying all mandatory criteria for permit issuance and disqualification. The process should then involve a detailed, item-by-item review of the applicant's submission against these criteria, utilizing all available verification tools and resources as permitted by law. Any ambiguities or potential issues should be flagged for further investigation or clarification, ensuring that the final decision is well documented and demonstrably compliant with Maine law. Question 16. System analysis indicates a Maine resident wishes to obtain a New Hampshire permit to carry a concealed handgun. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with New Hampshire's regulatory framework for non-resident applicants? Option A. Thoroughly research New Hampshire's specific requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits, including application forms, eligibility criteria, and required documentation. Option B. Submit an application based on the assumption that New Hampshire will automatically recognize a valid Maine permit without a separate application. Option C. Assume that Maine's application process and requirements for concealed handgun permits are identical to those in New Hampshire. Option D. Rely on general information about concealed carry permits and personal experiences shared by others regarding firearm licensing. Correct answer is A. Thoroughly research New Hampshire's specific requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits, including application forms, eligibility criteria, and required documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in New Hampshire. The core difficulty lies in navigating the reciprocity and application requirements of a different state, while ensuring full compliance with both Maine's and New Hampshire's laws. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting information can lead to application denial, potential legal repercussions, and damage to the applicant's credibility. Careful judgment is required to accurately identify the correct application process and necessary documentation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly researching New Hampshire's specific requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits. This includes identifying the correct application form, understanding the eligibility criteria, determining the required documentation, such as proof of residency in Maine, firearm safety training, and background check procedures, and knowing the correct agency to submit the application to. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal and procedural obligations imposed by New Hampshire law for non-residents seeking a permit. Adhering to these specific requirements ensures the application is complete and accurate, maximizing the likelihood of approval and avoiding violations of New Hampshire statutes governing concealed carry permits. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that Maine's application process and requirements are identical to New Hampshire's. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence in researching the target jurisdiction's laws. New Hampshire has its own distinct statutes and administrative rules regarding firearm permits, and assuming reciprocity without verification can lead to submitting an incomplete or incorrect application, violating New Hampshire's regulatory framework. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on general information about concealed carry permits without confirming its applicability to non-residents or the specific state of New Hampshire. This approach is flawed because it lacks the specificity required for a successful application. General information may not cover nuances like reciprocity agreements, specific training requirements for non-residents, or the correct issuing authority in New Hampshire, leading to procedural errors and potential denial. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application based on outdated information or personal anecdotes from other individuals. Laws and regulations can change, and personal experiences may not reflect current requirements or individual circumstances. This reliance on unreliable sources can result in noncompliance with current New Hampshire statutes and administrative rules, jeopardizing the application's validity. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a systematic decision-making process. First, identify the governing jurisdiction, New Hampshire, and the specific type of permit sought, non-resident concealed handgun permit. Second, consult official sources of information, such as the New Hampshire State Police or the relevant state agency responsible for issuing firearm permits and their official websites. Third, meticulously review all stated requirements, paying close attention to any distinctions for non-residents. Fourth, gather all necessary documentation and complete the application accurately and truthfully. Finally, submit the application to the correct authority through the prescribed method. This structured approach ensures all legal and procedural obligations are met, promoting ethical conduct and successful outcomes. Question 17. System analysis indicates a Maine resident holding a valid Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun is planning a trip to a neighboring state. What is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action to ensure they can legally carry their handgun concealed in the destination state? Option A. Rely solely on information provided by the Maine licensing authority regarding the validity of the permit outside of Maine. Option B. Seek advice from online forums and other permit holders about whether the Maine permit is accepted in the neighboring state. Option C. Assume that a Maine non-resident permit is valid in all neighboring states due to general reciprocity agreements. Option D. Proactively research the specific laws and reciprocity agreements of the neighboring state regarding concealed carry permits from other states. The correct answer is D. Proactively research the specific laws and reciprocity agreements of the neighboring state regarding concealed carry permits from other states. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in a neighboring state. The core difficulty lies in navigating the reciprocity agreements and differing legal requirements between states, specifically concerning the validity of a Maine permit in another jurisdiction. Misunderstanding these nuances can lead to legal complications, including potential charges for carrying a concealed weapon without proper authorization. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the laws of both the issuing state, Maine, and the state where the permit is intended for use. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively researching and understanding the specific laws and reciprocity agreements of the state where the Maine resident intends to carry a concealed handgun. This means consulting the official statutes or the licensing authority of that specific state to determine if a Maine non-resident permit is recognized and under what conditions. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal requirements of the destination state, ensuring compliance with their laws regarding concealed carry. It prioritizes accurate, jurisdiction-specific information, which is the bedrock of legal firearm possession, and is ethically sound as it respects the sovereignty and legal framework of the other state. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is assuming that a Maine non-resident permit is automatically valid in all neighboring states due to general reciprocity. This is a significant regulatory failure because reciprocity is not universal and is often state-specific, with varying conditions. Relying on assumptions rather than verified information can lead to violations of the destination state's laws. Another incorrect approach is to only rely on information from the Maine licensing authority regarding the validity of the permit outside of Maine. While the Maine authority can confirm the validity of the permit within Maine, they may not have comprehensive or up-to-date information on the specific reciprocity laws of every other state. This approach fails to acknowledge the independent legal authority of other jurisdictions. A third incorrect approach is to seek advice from informal sources, such as online forums or casual conversations with other permit holders. This is ethically problematic and a regulatory failure, because such sources are not authoritative and can provide inaccurate or outdated information. Legal compliance requires consulting official sources, not hearsay. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the specific state where concealed carry is intended. Second, consult the official website or licensing body of each of those states to research their laws on concealed carry and their specific reciprocity agreements with Maine. Third, if any ambiguity remains, contact the licensing authority of the destination state directly for clarification. This process ensures that actions are based on verified legal requirements, upholding both legal and ethical obligations. Question 18. Market research demonstrates a growing trend of individuals seeking to carry concealed handguns across state lines for various reasons. A firearms dealer operating in Maine receives an inquiry from an individual who is a resident of New Hampshire and possesses a valid New Hampshire concealed carry permit. The applicant wishes to purchase a handgun in Maine and intends to carry it concealed in Maine, relying on their New Hampshire permit. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Maine firearms dealer to ensure full compliance with Maine law? Option A. Process the handgun transfer based solely on the applicant's New Hampshire driver's license and their New Hampshire concealed carry permit, without independently confirming Maine's recognition of that specific permit. Option B. Deny the sale outright because the applicant is not a resident of Maine, regardless of their New Hampshire permit status. Option C. Assume that any valid concealed carry permit from a neighboring state like New Hampshire automatically allows the holder to carry a concealed handgun in Maine and proceed with the transfer. Option D. Verify that the applicant's New Hampshire permit is recognized under Maine's reciprocity laws and that the applicant meets all Maine eligibility requirements for handgun possession. Then proceed with the federal background check and any other state-specific transfer requirements. The correct answer is D. Verify that the applicant's New Hampshire permit is recognized under Maine's reciprocity laws, and that the applicant meets all Maine eligibility requirements for handgun possession. Then proceed with the federal background check and any other state-specific transfer requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearms dealer in Maine to navigate the specific requirements for processing a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun. The dealer must balance their business operations with strict adherence to Maine's laws regarding firearm transfers and the recognition of out-of-state permits, ensuring they do not inadvertently facilitate an illegal transfer or violate the applicant's rights. The complexity arises from understanding the nuances of Maine's reciprocity agreements and the documentation required from non-residents. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying the applicant's eligibility and the validity of their out-of-state permit against Maine's specific statutory requirements for non-resident permit holders. This includes confirming that the applicant's home state permit is recognized by Maine, and that the applicant meets all other Maine residency and eligibility criteria for possessing a handgun, even if they are not a Maine resident. The dealer must ensure all federal and state transfer requirements are met, including the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, check, and that the applicant possesses a valid permit from a state with which Maine has a reciprocity agreement or that Maine law otherwise recognizes. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety by ensuring the applicant is legally authorized to carry a concealed handgun in Maine. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that any valid concealed carry permit from another state automatically grants the holder the right to carry a concealed handgun in Maine without further verification. This fails to acknowledge Maine's specific reciprocity laws and the potential for differing permit requirements between states could lead to an illegal transfer or an individual carrying a concealed handgun without proper authorization under Maine law. Another incorrect approach is to process the transfer solely based on the applicant's out-of-state driver's license and the out-of-state permit, without confirming if Maine law recognizes that specific permit, or if the applicant meets Maine's general eligibility requirements for handgun possession. This overlooks the critical step of ensuring the permit is valid for carry within Maine, and that the individual is not otherwise prohibited from possessing a handgun under Maine statutes. A third incorrect approach is to deny the transfer solely because the applicant is not a Maine resident, without first determining if they possess a valid, recognized permit that allows them to carry concealed in Maine. Maine law allows non-residents to carry concealed handguns under certain conditions, and a blanket denial based on residency without considering permit reciprocity is a failure to apply the law correctly. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, they must thoroughly understand Maine statutes concerning concealed carry permits for both residents and non-residents, including reciprocity agreements. Second, they should request and carefully review all required documentation from the applicant, including proof of identity, the out-of-state permit, and any other documents specified by Maine law. Third, they must conduct the mandatory NICS background check. Fourth, they should consult official Maine resources or legal counsel if there is any ambiguity regarding the validity of an out-of-state permit or the applicant's eligibility. This structured approach ensures all legal obligations are met and promotes responsible firearm sales. Question 19. System analysis indicates a Maine resident is seeking to obtain a permit to carry a concealed handgun in New Hampshire. Which approach best ensures compliance with New Hampshire's regulatory framework for non-resident permit applications? Option A. Assume that the application process and documentation required for a Maine resident permit are sufficient for New Hampshire non-resident permit. Option B. Submit an application to New Hampshire using Maine's application form, believing that the states will share information to process it correctly. Option C. Directly consult New Hampshire's official state agency responsible for firearm permits to obtain the correct application forms and understand all specific requirements for non-residents. Option D. Rely solely on general information found on firearm enthusiast websites regarding reciprocity between Maine and New Hampshire. The correct answer is C. Directly consult New Hampshire's official state agency responsible for firearm permits to obtain the correct application forms and understand all specific requirements for non-residents. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun in New Hampshire. The core difficulty lies in navigating the reciprocity and application requirements of a different state, while ensuring full compliance with both Maine's and New Hampshire's laws. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting information on the application can lead to denial, legal repercussions, and a loss of trust. Careful judgment is required to accurately identify the relevant legal frameworks and application procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly researching New Hampshire's specific requirements for non-resident concealed handgun permits, including any necessary application forms, supporting documentation, and the relevant state agency responsible for issuing these permits. This approach is correct because Maine law, while governing resident permits, does not dictate the application process for permits issued by other states. New Hampshire's laws and regulations exclusively govern the issuance of permits to carry a concealed handgun within its borders, regardless of the applicant's state of residence. Therefore, adhering strictly to New Hampshire's established procedures is the only legally sound and ethically responsible path. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that Maine's application process or requirements for a resident permit are directly transferable to New Hampshire. This is a regulatory failure because each state has its own sovereign authority to set its own laws regarding firearm permits. Relying on Maine's framework would mean ignoring New Hampshire's specific statutes and administrative rules, leading to an incomplete or invalid application. Another incorrect approach is to only consult general online resources about firearm reciprocity without verifying the information directly with New Hampshire's official state agencies. This is an ethical and regulatory failure because online information can be outdated, inaccurate, or incomplete. Professional responsibility demands seeking information from authoritative sources to ensure compliance with current laws and regulations. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application based on a partial understanding of New Hampshire's requirements, hoping that any omissions will be overlooked. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the legal obligations involved in obtaining a permit. It is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the established legal process and could be construed as an attempt to circumvent lawful requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a systematic decision-making process. First, identify the target jurisdiction, New Hampshire, and the specific permit being sought, non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun. Second, determine the authoritative source of information for that jurisdiction's laws and application procedures, which would be the relevant New Hampshire state agency, e.g., the Department of Safety or State Police. Third, meticulously gather all required documentation and complete the application accurately and truthfully, adhering strictly to the specified procedures. Finally, maintain records of the application process and any correspondence with the issuing authority. Question 20. System analysis indicates a client is applying for a Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun. The application fee is $100 and the permit is valid for 5 years. The renewal fee is also $100. If the client wishes to maintain this permit continuously for 10 years, what is the total projected cost, assuming they renew on time? Option A, $100. Option B, $150. Option C, $250. Option D, $200. The correct answer is D, $200. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a financial professional to navigate the specific fee structures and renewal timelines associated with a Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun, while also considering the applicant's financial capacity and the potential for future renewal costs. Misinterpreting these financial obligations could lead to the applicant's permit lapsing unintentionally, creating legal issues and potentially impacting their ability to carry a concealed handgun in Maine. Accurate calculation and clear communication of these costs are paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves accurately calculating the total initial cost of the permit, including the application fee and any associated processing or background check fees, and then projecting the renewal cost based on the permit's validity period and the statutory renewal fee. This approach ensures the applicant is fully informed of all immediate and future financial commitments. For a Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun, the application fee is $100, and the permit is valid for 5 years. The renewal fee is also $100. Therefore, the total cost over the first 5 years is $100, initial, plus $0, renewal within 5 years, equals $100. The cost for the subsequent 5-year period, renewal, would be an additional $100. This approach aligns with the Maine Revised Statutes, Title 25, Chapter 101, Subchapter 1, which outlines the permit fees and validity periods, ensuring transparency and responsible financial planning for the applicant. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to only consider the initial application fee and fail to account for the renewal fee. This would lead to an incomplete financial picture for the applicant, potentially causing them to be unprepared for the cost of maintaining their permit in the future. This overlooks the ongoing financial obligation associated with the permit. Another incorrect approach is to miscalculate the renewal period or fee. For instance, assuming a shorter validity period or a different renewal cost would result in inaccurate financial projections, potentially misleading the applicant about the long-term financial commitment. This demonstrates a lack of attention to the specific statutory requirements for Maine permits. A further incorrect approach is to provide a vague estimate of costs without breaking down the initial and renewal fees. This lacks the precision required for financial planning and could leave the applicant uncertain about the exact amounts they will need to pay, hindering their ability to budget effectively. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to financial advisement related to permits. This involves 1. Identifying the specific permit and jurisdiction Maine non-resident permit to carry a concealed handgun. 2. Researching the relevant statutes and regulations for all associated fees and validity periods, Maine Revised Statutes, Title 25, Chapter 101, Subchapter 1. 3. Performing precise calculations for initial application costs and projected renewal costs. 4. Clearly communicating these financial details to the applicant, including timelines for renewal. 5. Ensuring the applicant understands the total financial commitment over the lifespan of the permit.